Welcome to the Pursuing Happiness podcast, where we discuss living the good life, what that means, and how to do it. Thanks again for tuning in. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing mental health and why that's so important. We've got a very special guest, Meg Cathers. She runs her own office. She is a licensed professional counselor. She's got a master's degree also in education, so I feel like she does a really good job at explaining things and putting it in a way that even I can understand. So again, we're so grateful to have you on. Thank you. I know this isn't an easy subject to touch on, but I think it's an important one. So thank you very much again for coming on.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're excited to have you here. I know this is going to be a great episode. Can you explain a little bit, I guess, about yourself, your whys, and like how you got into therapy and to helping people?
Absolutely. So I've actually only been in this profession a little less than 2 years. My 2-year anniversary of my business being open is coming up in May.
Awesome. Congrats.
But I originally went to school to be a teacher and got the bachelor's degree in middle school education. I went and taught math for 7 years, got my master's in education, did all the things, and came to the realization that the public school system was really having a negative effect on my mental health. And I didn't realize it because I was taking it out on my kids and my husband, and just life was becoming overwhelming. So I had somebody say to me, "Hey, have you ever thought about talking to somebody?" And I said, "No, I don't need that. I don't want that." But, because it has to be my idea, I eventually said, "Okay, fine, I'll go." And looked into a bunch of different therapists. But the one that ended up clicking, and I do believe that God's hand was all over this, because I found a former teacher who was also a turned therapist. And so when I got to sit with her for the first time, she said, "You don't have to explain anything. I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt." So it was really refreshing to sit with somebody who actually knew where I was coming from.
Absolutely.
And a couple years later, I learned so much about my own mental health journey and my own emotional intelligence and some trauma and all sorts of other fun things. And she said, "Is teaching really where you think you need to be?" Like, I really don't think it is. And so I got into teaching because I wanted to help kids learn math because I didn't understand math. And so now I'm like, I think I want to be a mental health therapist because I know what it's like to be on the couch and not in the cute fancy chair. Yeah. And so I went and got back another master's degree, and here I am.
That's awesome that you're wired like that, though. It's like, okay, I struggled with this, so I want to help people because I personally know what this is like. And now it's like, I personally know what it's like to struggle with mental health. So I want to spend my life and my working time helping as many people as I possibly can. So that's awesome. I think not only are your clients blessed to have you, but I think our viewers are definitely going to be blessed by today's episode. And I think it's going to be not only an important one, but this is going to be a deep conversation. Mm-hmm. I know one of the things that I did want to mention is just out of respect for obviously your clients and your profession and honoring your HIPAA, you're obviously wouldn't discuss your client's information or anything, but I do obviously give you permission to kind of, I don't want to say dissect my life, but use me, if you will, as an example, because, and we'll get right into it. This year, or this last year, what's led to this podcast has actually came from a very dark place, if you will, because of some things that I've gone through, some real life things, right? Business has kind of always been my thing. Real estate's been my thing. Everything was going great, we'll call it, for the first 6 months of last year. And I was out of town on vacation, on a long weekend vacation, and my dog passed away when I was out of town. I wasn't prepared for this. She was more than just a dog to me. I had this dog, I had Millie before I met my wife, and for a couple of years, I purposefully spent by myself, focusing on myself and wanting to just be better and work on myself so that I could be the person that I needed to be to have the life and the wife and the everything that I needed. So that dog was very special to me. I was completely blown back. My wife at the time was 5 or 6 months pregnant. So I'm already, in all honesty, nervous about that, scared about that. Who isn't? You
Mhm.
don't have a kid yet, and
Sure.
that is very much in your
Yeah.
coming future. And
Yeah.
then, my dog passing away, and it sparked this. I don't know if it was from something from childhood trauma or whatever it
Mm.
was, but it just ignited this snowball of negativity. I took off for months, not purposefully, but I literally for the first month just shut down with like anxiety and depression and just sadness,
Mhm.
not even just for that situation, but just everything. Like I've always been so great at just sweeping everything under the rug, just tough it out,
Mhm.
whatever. Like I could write the book on just toughing it out, but I've realized the people around us, my wife, my son, my friends, and everybody, they kind of deserve me to be at my best when I can be. And so mental health not only affects us, but it affects those around us. And I think
Absolutely.
that's special that you do that, and that you do what you do. And I think, again, I'm grateful that you're able to come on here and explain what mental health is, what mental health isn't. I know you've got a PowerPoint here that also that you're going to use and
Yeah.
explain some of the things. Can you explain, I guess, what anxiety, depression, where that stems from?
Absolutely. So, anxiety and depression both stem from the same place in the brain. And that
I
is
did not know that.
typically why your antidepressants take care of a little bit of anxiety and why your anti-anxieties take a little bit of take the edge off of your depression.
Yeah,
But there's no research to back this up. I don't have a study to point to or anything. It's just from experience from
yeah.
watching people for almost 2 years, right?
What you
Um,
do every day. Yeah,
right,
exactly. Yeah,
exactly. But I have drawn out multiple times like this little just kind of, I don't know, angle, if you will, or a pyramid,
yeah.
whatever you want to call it. But where if people come to me with a lot of anxiety and the anxiety has increased and it keeps increasing and it increased and it got to this place where up at the top of this pyramid, something switches, something hits, and eventually they're tired of being anxious all the time. They're sick of being sick and
Hmm.
worrying, and they just say, you know what, forget it, I'm done. And on down the hill we go this way towards depression. And then we sink lower and lower and lower
Gotcha.
and lower into depression. So, um, from my perspective, of course, the first line of defense is let's get you out of that depression. Let's pull you out of that hole. The struggle with that is that people start feeling better, which is really great.
Yeah,
But, and here's the big warning sign, is that at the top of that pyramid, that event or that thing is going to start coming back up again.
resurfacing. Yeah.
And so are the anxiety symptoms. And so people will often terminate services early because they think they're feeling so much better, everything's great. Pause, because you'll start to notice that your anxiety symptoms will come back full force, and it's because we took care of this. Now we got to take care of this.
Yeah.
And so that is usually a twofold kind of piece there that we have
Yeah.
to look at in therapy.
And it's interesting how that, like, how you explaining that, and I'm sitting here thinking in my own life, and even in just this own last year, that's led to this
Hmm.
podcast, to this episode, to everything that I've experienced in my life. And I will say, I feel like I'm happier now than ever, and I'm grateful that I went through this. But this season, like, it started exactly with that. It started with my it started with the sadness, the depression, the anxiety, and it was all in one. I mean, I
Hmm.
guess I think I've probably always had a bit of a need for control or even
Hmm.
perfectionism,
Hmm.
but I think that event sparked everything. I think everything that I had swept under the rug finally got to the point where the rug was just floating off the ground. It can no longer be swept under. Like,
Right.
it is time to pay the piper. And you mentioned how God worked in your life, and again,
Hmm.
I've seen God work in my life over and over and over throughout the years and throughout the different seasons. And His timing is perfect. And I have seen, again, this happened 3 months prior to having my son, and then I have my
Hmm.
son, and of course, I don't want to scare anybody away, but your first couple months of having a baby for the first time, it is tough.
It
It has its
is
challenges. The best thing I've
100%.
ever done in my entire life. I love it. now. After I got through the first couple of months,
get over the hump.
But I realized in that season of going through that last year, how it impacts my wife's life, and God bless her, she is such a saint, but how it impacts her life, how it impacts the lives of those around me, how my demeanor and my mood is all impacted by that. But even what I do, even being a real estate agent, I as cheesy as this sounds, I mean, I do what I do. I serve people out of love. Like I'm happy with my life, so I want to go and help them do what it is that you buy a house or sell a home or something. So like that's like my motivation. That was kind of why I felt literally debilitated with depression and anxiety, because normally I am so far ahead of the game. Like I prepare for everything. I try and prepare for every possible outcome. And then something happened that I just could not prepare for. Wasn't prepared for. It was like the nightmare scenario that would happen. And what that sparked was some kind of a trauma to where I always felt like something bad was going to happen to Hank. For probably the first 3 months of his life, every single day I feared like he would cough or like just choke or something. I'm like, oh my God, Jackie, what's going on? Like,
right.
And that I knew that was not sustainable, right? I couldn't worry that much. And I did go through that. I went through like that level of anxiety, and then finally I got to that just level of sad and depression. And then finally I came out with like, okay, I need to change. And it's nothing that I did or wrong or anything, but like I need to address this. And so that's when I started looking into all of this and realized the importance of all of this for everybody. And everybody's circumstance is different, right? It might not be a traumatic thing that sparks it. It could be something from the childhood, but so important. Can you walk us through, I guess, what the differences would be between like for example, like PTSD or anxiety or depression, and what those things are and maybe what they are not? Because I know these things are so misdiagnosed, and everybody's friend is a therapist, even when they're not. Like you're getting a lot of unprofessional advice. Everybody's got an opinion, right? So it's like
Google.
Yeah, Google, exactly. Well, what's Google say?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh. Those 3 diagnoses are a generalized anxiety disorder,
Depression.
post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm thinking, and then of course, depression. You've got those 3, and those are the most common, like, things that people are calling for. They're saying, I'm experiencing depression. I'm experiencing anxiety. I have experienced trauma, or I'm currently experiencing trauma, things like that. And so being able to differentiate between the 3, because weirdly enough, I am actually going to normalize a lot of people's experiences. It's when you're functioning, your overall functioning in multiple areas.
I think that's going to be a good thing for people. I think when people understand what real serious clinical depression is and real serious and anxiety disorder, and understand like, okay, there's also like a normal life, and normal life is also going to be hard, but I think it's almost motivating to know, hey, there is things that I can do to make my life better right now. And so, can you, I guess, explain that and break that down for us?
Absolutely. Well, it's funny because I have generalized anxiety disorder pulled up, and hopefully viewers will be able to see this as well, to be able to have that visual of, what is and what isn't. But it's so funny. One of the generalized anxiety disorder is the mind goes blank, especially faced with pressure. That literally is what happened to me just now when I completely I was like, that's the anxiety talking, right? So generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, is what we call it in my circles. It's that persistent worrying, and it's not just, oh no, I'm worried about this thing coming up at work. It's crippling, and it affects not just work, but home, family, friends, the dog, the kids, it's almost like every area of your life has been completely permeated with extreme worry. And another piece of this is that you can't bring it back. It runs
Yeah.
away with you to a place that is really dark and scary.
It's like
And
out of control.
exactly. And then that could lead to a lot of really poor coping skills at that point. And so it's that difficulty controlling the worry. Your somatic symptoms, so how your body responds, the sweating, and it's not hot.
Yeah. Yeah.
The constant sweating is another kind of symptom that anxiety disorder is taking hold there. Anticipating something bad happening all the time. Have you seen Inside Out 2?
I've seen bits and pieces of
Oh,
it. I've seen the first one. I haven't seen the second one.
Jake, you gotta go watch
I
the
will
second one.
yeah.
Oh, I have been referencing this movie, and I'm like, I know it's a kids movie, and I know, but
It's so great. Yeah.
I mean it, because the whole movie is about the teenager going through puberty,
Yeah.
and anxiety shows up, and she's like head
Okay,
honcho
gotcha. Yeah.
over this girl's brain. And I mean, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the movie, but it's fine. It's a kids movie. And so at the end, like anxiety, she ends up having a panic attack because anxiety is moving so fast and has completely taken over everything that it has even affected her core beliefs. And core beliefs is a core tenet of cognitive behavioral therapy that I won't talk about later. But it's that anxiety causes you to dream up these scenarios. And if you watch the movie, you kind of see this played out where her, the little girl's imagination has been taken over by anxiety, and anxiety is forcing her imagination to come up with all of these crazy scenarios, and none of them are positive. She even throws out the positive ones. She only keeps the crazy negative ones.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it is. And so it's imagining those worst case scenarios at school, work, home, family. I mean, all of these areas of functioning. And it's crippling.
Yeah. That's what I mean. And that's what it was for me. It was like, I am usually such an optimist, probably like to an annoying point where it's like, why does Jake always think everything's going to work out? It doesn't work like that. And I'm like, it kind of does. I'm like, I feel like, and for that season, something switched to the negative to where I just felt like if anything could go wrong, it would go wrong. And then when it did go wrong, because sometimes things do go wrong, that confirmation bias just led me even further into this negative world. And I became a person, at least for a season, that I didn't want to be. And it was out of my control. But then the things that I would do as a result of that, if you are short-tempered with somebody or a relationship or something, those things linger. People will remember those things forever. So I feel like it's so important to get a grasp on that before you can. Like I mentioned, I've always been great at like sweeping things under the rug. Well, for the first time in my life after having my son, I've never had a natural fear of death. That might sound bad. I feel like I've always known where I was going to go, and I've just never really had that until my son was born, because for the first time ever in my life, something is so out of control. This little guy hopefully will outlive me long past me, and he will carry on the things that I teach him forever. And so that fear of not being able to always be there and protect him, I just constantly, with my job, with real estate, I prepare for everything. I try and prepare for any situation. I've been through any situation, and that's why it's so important to be with somebody, for example, a therapist or my profession, a real estate agent who's been through enough things to where they have the experiences that they've been through. So I'm constantly trying to prepare for everything, but there's things in life that unfortunately you can't until they hit you on the chin.
Absolutely.
So in anxiety and even depression, I know you're going to explain as well. Those are those kind of things. There's a difference between being sad and being depressed. There's a big difference.
Oh, 100%.
I've been sad before. Depression's something different. Can you explain what that is? Because like you said, anxiety, and I know even depression too, like it can be crippling. It can keep you from wanting to get out of bed.
Absolutely. Well, before I talk about deep into depression, I do want to talk about what anxiety isn't, only because I have a lot of people telling me, well, I'm experiencing anxiety. I'm experiencing anxiety. Anxiety is actually an emotion. You're allowed to feel that.
Yeah.
We validate those feelings.
Yeah.
Please feel anxious. I mean, because there's times when you start a new job, when you're getting ready to have a baby. I mean,
it's not just like a thing that you have.
Right. It's a feeling. It's an emotion. And please feel those feelings. You're allowed to feel anxious. In fact, we would look at you funny if you didn't. Like, please go do that. But where it becomes a disorder is, like I said, when it permeates all areas of functioning and so on. But here's what anxiety isn't. Anxiety is not stress. Anxiety disorder. I'm sorry. Anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
That's the key there. It is not stress. Stress is natural. Stress is supposed to happen. It's fear. If you're getting ready to, get hit by a car or something bad happened to you, like, please be fearful.
Yeah.
That's not anxiety disorder
it's
either.
If it's mechanism,
right. Please be fear. Like, you're supposed to have fear. And again, it's emotion. It's also not a series of panic attacks. If you're experiencing panic attacks on the regular, then that is what we call panic disorder. And that, it's under the umbrella of anxiety, but that is a whole other kettle of fish.
Yeah.
So, that's, some people will say, well, I'm experiencing anxiety, but I'm having, persistent attacks. I'm at school, I'm doing this, and it comes up on me, and and it's so crippling, I can't even get up off the floor. So, okay, though, now we're talking about something a little bit different.
Yeah.
Generalized anxiety disorder is quite literally that. It's a very general anxiety of multiple areas of functioning to where you can't move forward.
Gotcha.
And so that's where it kind of becomes a disorder piece. So, so the panic disorder, that's a thing. But there's also a level of perfectionism that can come with generalized anxiety disorder as well. And you're already raising your hand. Yep. Because the perfectionism side is trying to get out ahead of all of these possible scenarios. So again, kind of recalling back to the movie I was just talking about.
Inside Out
2. That she's trying to come up with all of these possible scenarios, and there's some trauma behind that because you're trying to prevent something bad from happening to you. And so because you're trying to prevent something bad, you have to predict all of these horrible outcomes so that you can prepare yourself. And that is what kind of some of the core of generalized anxiety disorder really is, because you get stuck in those predictions and going
you do
so far.
100 things to prepare for one possible thing, and you spend all of your time and energy and focus doing exactly that. And I unfortunately, I'm definitely a bit of a perfectionist. I've gotten better, but and that, whether that's a career thing or that's just how I am for whatever reason, I get that, and I get wanting to be ahead of it. But unfortunately, that is just not how real life works.
Right.
And that is the season I've been in this year for me personally, which I know we're very much into the very beginning of this year, but that's the thing that I have finally had to do, was just let go and let God. And that was hard, but it's been the best thing ever for me. And I've been there before, but I think that last year was just that season that put me back into that place. And it's given me an entirely new gratitude for my life, my family, my wife, and all that stuff. So it's like these things aren't always, I feel like, and this is just my opinion, but I feel like while these things suck, especially while we're in them, it's not always a curse. Like there's some collateral beauty that comes with the learning and the growing in these valleys. In your experience with anxiety, is that something that people can, like GAD, which you mentioned is like a generalized anxiety disorder, is that something that people can usually grow out of or talk their way out of? Is that okay? So that's not, that's not a terminal thing. Like you're gonna have anxiety forever.
I think some therapists think so, and because there are different approaches and ways of looking at psychology and the human mind, right? I tend to believe that we're all sinful creatures at the end of all of this. So, and we need a savior, but that's beside the point, So I'm coming at it from a little bit of a different lens. But yes, I tend to believe that that's why you go to therapy. That's why you maybe temporarily got on medication for a little while, because they say therapy plus medication is
Yeah.
the best
Yeah.
way to overcome some of these things, right? And so there's modalities to actually treat GAD.
Yeah. Absolutely. That was something, I mean, I'm happy to admit that was something that I had to do for a period, was be on some anxiety antidepressant medication, because I was stuck in a cycle of just literally that, just being stuck in a continuously negative place, to where I was trying to overdo everything and was really underdoing everything. So what about, going into, you mentioned that anxiety kind of leads into depression. Maybe that's a good segue into that. What would be like a depression disorder then, or what is that?
So kind of just like anxiety, people come and say, I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling depressed. I'm experiencing depression. Those are two completely different things. So when you're, again, feeling depressed, that's an emotion. Sometimes you do feel down, depressed, and hopeless. The difference is when it's persistent. If you see a persistently low mood for 2 weeks, plus all of these other really cool things I'm getting ready to tell you, now we're starting to see it affect your overall functioning in multiple areas. Now it's starting to become a disorder. But the feeling of depression is very different than having major depressive disorder, if that makes sense. So
it's interesting. Okay.
Sorry. So one of those things is, again, it's consistent, persistent. That feeling of hopelessness. You lose enjoyment or interest in things that you used to enjoy. You completely drop off the face of the earth in that way. You either sleep too much or not enough. They call that hypersomnia, which is like coping by sleeping. I know some people tell me, oh, one of my coping skills is taking a nap. That's actually a level of avoidance.
Yeah.
You avoid your problems by, I'm just going to go to sleep. Yeah. So that's a problem. The inability to concentrate, feeling empty, and there's even a lack of self-care practices. So you might even see some, you're more like extreme cases of, I just don't, showering is too much work.
Wow.
Getting up and making myself a meal is too much work.
Like physically, yeah.
Yes. And so it's like, it takes this physical heavy toll, and you're depressed when it gets to that place. It doesn't always have to lead to any kind of suicidality. But it can. I also want to kind of offshoot here and kind of normalize suicidal ideation for a second.
Yeah.
I think it is very natural, and I think everybody on the face of this planet right now would lie if they say that they didn't at some level say, yeah, I think it'd be pretty cool if I wasn't here anymore. Or I wonder what it would be like
at some point
if I wasn't gone.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that's fairly normal. Where we start to get really concerned is if you've got a plan and some intent to do so. Yeah. Okay, now we're kind of getting into the danger zone, right?
Yeah.
So even the thoughts of, I just don't really want to be here anymore, that is probably indicative of depression as well. But interestingly enough, here's what it isn't. It's not alcoholism. It's not addiction. Because now, can the two coincide, and can they happen together? Absolutely. In fact, most people who are addicted to a substance in some way, shape, or form are also depressed. But that doesn't mean that you are depressed. Does that make sense? They're just they're two separate things that can happen at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah.
But so it's not addiction. It's not large mood swings. These are all separate disorders that we would categorize these. It's not bereavement. It's not loss. So I know that you were talking about the loss of your pet. It is actually, we spend a lot of time in therapy normalizing the feeling of loss and sadness, and even the feeling of depression after the loss of something. But that does not mean that you are depressed. Does that make sense? Or have depressive disorder?
Absolutely. So and when you say like normalizing, it's not making light of something. What it's saying is like, hey, things aren't helplessly wrong right now. Mm-hmm. This is normal. Right. I talk with people on a daily basis, and these are all things that most people at some point in their life will experience. Mm-hmm. So, and sometimes that is a good feeling in and of itself. So that may be the biggest blessing that somebody takes from this is understanding that, hey, there is hope in this, and there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Absolutely.
And I'm here to say, I mean, I feel like this has been such a great year, and I needed to go through a lot of things. I feel like this podcast is a huge result, not only just this episode, but this podcast in its entirety kind of came from that level of lostness, because I did realize like everything can be going good, and you can still be in a season for whatever reason. Like there's
100%.
different things that can control that, right? There's circumstances. There's even just like, for me, I've been in seasons of like a lack of gratitude, like where I should be so thankful, and all I had to do was just switch that perspective. There's going to be actually an episode on perspectives in the future.
Very cool.
But yeah, so again, thank you for being on here and explaining that stuff for us as well. So people who've gone through, we'll call it like an event, my understanding of like a traumatic PTSD, right?
Yeah.
We think of somebody who's been in active duty combat, or somebody who's just had like a horrible trial or horrible childhood or something like that, or somebody who's been through whatever. Can you explain what that is, and how do we get the same level of, I don't want to say normalization, but like hope? How does somebody start to rebuild their life again after something traumatic? Can you explain that to us?
Absolutely. So PTSD and trauma, they're buzzwords right now, especially in the mental health community. It seems like more trauma is being revealed or realized for the first time in many, many years because of everybody just putting it under the rug for so long. Or if they didn't do that, maybe they didn't even realize that that's what it was. And then they're coming to the realization, oh man, that's what this was.
Yeah.
But I want to take a minute too to explain what PTSD is and why this is the most common Google diagnosis. Because people call me and say, because people will call me and say, I think I have PTSD, or they'll, even incorporate it in conversation and say, well, there's my PTSD coming out, or something like that. And unfortunately, it's just miseducation. And so that's kind of what this piece is. PTSD is a perceived or actual threat of violence or death.
Okay.
So it is not a minor negative altercation, like, some lady at the grocery store completely dressed you down in the middle of Kroger, and it was so traumatic for me. I must have PTSD. Probably not. That's a little bit of a, exaggeration there. But PTSD is not always necessarily relational trauma or intergenerational trauma as well. That's another buzzword that's getting floated around a lot, is intergenerational trauma. My understanding of that is someone in your line has been traumatized in some way, whether that's childhood trauma, maybe they've been through a level of abuse or went to combat, and then that affected the way that they raise their kids, which then affects the way that they raise their kids, which affects the way that they raise their kids, and it just slides down the hill. And so I find a lot of my clients right now are trying to break those chains of what they've seen generationally go on. But that's not
cycle.
Right. But that's not necessarily PTSD. That's just a traumatic experience or a series of traumatic experiences. Now, where it gets into PTSD is a perceived or actual threat of violence or death. Actually, statistically, veterans are one of the smaller percentages of people suffering from PTSD. And it's because the VA, Veterans Affairs, has sunk so much money into research on PTSD. That's kind of why we see it so prevalent in our society of,
understand. Okay.
Yeah, veterans must have PTSD. Yeah. Well, it's because, and truthfully, a lot of them do experience PTSD, especially if they've been in combat situations or have witnessed a lot of really traumatic things, right?
Yeah.
But actually, the biggest percentage of people who have true, honest to goodness PTSD or domestic violence situations. But we don't have good numbers on them because these people are not willing to come forward, which makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
So we don't actually have a whole lot of data to support that. It's an extrapolation.
Yeah.
So, but what PTSD looks like.
It makes sense when you break it down that. Oh, no, you're good. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt
you.
No.
When
you put it that way, when you talked about like the domestic violence and how people have that perceived feeling of like death or like, does that mean so like if somebody who's been through domestic violence or something would feel like everyone is, essentially out to get them or something like that? That helps to understand what that actually is, as opposed to what it is not. So I think that's a great,
Sexual assault's another one. I actually have multiple clients that are currently experiencing a trauma therapy that I go through for sexual assault. And of course, that can be from, whenever you experience that. It doesn't just have to be in a certain amount of time. But my goal for this is to say PTSD looks very different than what I would say mainstream media would have you believe. So PTSD it's those flashbacks in the form of nightmares or maybe even daymares. Some people will flash back to the point where I was back there. I was battling those same demons. I was still doing X, Y, and Z. And I felt like it was real. It, of course, impairs their functioning. Some people have somatic symptoms. Again, how your body responds. They get hot all of a sudden or extremely cold when threatened with any sort of outside force. They're jumpy. They're easily startled. They disassociate, which means that they just kind of stop and pull back and you can see them going away. Disassociating happens quite a bit. And that's the PTSD end of things. But when we look and I don't want to downgrade anyone's experiences.
Yeah, I get exactly where you're coming from.
Do you see where like the difference is? Like if you experience trauma, please go see a therapist. Please come talk to me. Trauma is my thing. But it may, just because you have trauma does not necessarily mean that it lends itself to PTSD, depending on what the traumatic event was, if that makes sense.
And it's important to know that because like I said, one of the ways is obviously to have hope and when you're normalizing something, and I think one like a Google diagnosis, like you saying that like people will put themselves in this very bad, I don't want to say bad, but this very like traumatized group when in reality there is certain things that you can do, whether it's talking with a therapist, going on walks, improving your diet, that can change your mood and your reality. And there's so many people that are in that bucket. And again, I would love to be able to help everybody, but obviously those are the kind of people who can take something and maybe not even need therapy. I don't know when is that the right move for somebody. I mean, I would probably lean on the side of being safe, obviously, if you have even, and that's one of the things I know I've talked with you off camera before about. You're very good at like pairing people either with the right therapist or getting people to a point where they're not coming to you. Like that's your goal. Like, right? How do I get you to return back to normal life? It's another reason why I wanted to have you of any therapist on here is because like what you are trying to do is get people out of that cycle so they can go and return to their normal life. So
absolutely.
I guess is it always the right move to start with somebody first in terms of like getting into therapy for these things? Or
I think that's a phenomenal question because I have people, I offer free consultations and I have people say, do I even really need this?
Yeah.
Is that something that I really should do? Do you, in your professional opinion, And I mean, I'm a big proponent for everyone going to therapy. I think everyone should go, whether you're experiencing these things or not. But I think that the goal of therapy, yes, is for you to move to normal functioning again. It's not to need me forever. My goal is for you to be off on your own. But I I think that if you're experiencing anything that you can't either directly cope with or you're struggling to cope with, or if you just need that objective third party opinion, I have found that it is very nice to come in, verbal diarrhea all over your therapist, and then leave. and then you don't have to see them in, for 2 weeks or the next week or whatever.
Well, instead of like instead of like doing that, like you said, verbal diarrhea on your wife or your brother, sister, or your best friend who has to, and that's great to have a friend who can occasionally, take a 30-minute phone call and just let you vent. I'm all for venting, but like a therapist is somebody who asks the right questions and challenges 100%. The right mindsets, right? Like my understanding, or what I always thought of therapy, was like, you're going to give somebody all the right answers, which you don't necessarily have always the right answers, but it's right. Can you explain, I guess, what therapy is and isn't? I know you've expressed, what anxiety is and isn't, but can you tell us, like, what does therapy look like, I guess, for somebody who is to come in and talk that out with a therapist?
Absolutely. Oh man. So, therapy is, it can be a short-term process or it can be a long-term process depending on your goals. You are driving the ship. I'm just over here with a map of the ocean. One of my clients came up with that metaphor and I have used it all the time.
So a client came up with that. Oh, that's cool.
Oh, of course you did. And because I have said before, do you really want to go there? Is that where you want to be? And she goes, girl, I'm driving the ship. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I will shut up and we'll go there, you know? And so really, it is not a therapist saying, okay, here's all your problems, and let me just give you a roadmap on how to fix all of this. We have to be very choosy about the advice that we give. Yeah. Because we're not supposed to inflict our views and beliefs on anyone. We're supposed to be a mirror to you. I match your vibe. And if you want to come in and scream and yell and rant and rave, I'll do it along there with you. Or I can just be still as a statue and let you do it. Yeah. I've had people say, I think I just need to sit here and cry for an hour. Okay, I'll probably join you. Yeah. I am that person who is mirroring your experience, but also there to challenge you. Yeah. It is not my job to say, oh my gosh, you're so right. Everything that you're doing is completely right. Everybody else is wrong. That's not at all my role either. It is to say, have you ever thought about this? Have you ever thought? So it's more questions. And
it's like you're in that moment, right? Like you're in that moment of vulnerability, and you have all of these emotions going through, and being in that moment with a professional, when they're able to say, okay, well, I don't want to say, how does that make you feel? I know that sounds like the cliche, but like one little question at the right time when you're in that right moment can shift it all. And I think 100%. That's the biggest shift for me this year, was when I just decided to make that shift. I know you and I have talked in the past, and that was one of the things, like, somebody has to want change in their life. Like somebody, whether they're depressed or not, they have to, whether somebody tells them this or not, they have to be able to see where they're at and decide, like, okay, enough is enough. It's time to seek help or find help and change. So, again, I thank you for explaining everything that you've explained. I feel like there's so many things, even myself, and I know Chris and I have talked about this too. There are so many things that we didn't know, or we had like our perceived notions of what that was, including therapy. I know, that's something that you mentioned in the beginning, was like, nope, I don't want to go when it was time to come. And I feel like everybody thinks like that. Like, no, I don't need a therapist. I don't need to talk to somebody. I don't need somebody telling me this or that. So I guess explaining what therapy is and isn't, and then people just kind of getting to see this and this experience, like it's very beneficial. It's super helpful. So there's definitely people that do need therapists, and sometimes like long term, but I know there's other individuals that will come into your office and you'll tell them, like, hey, you might not need therapy. Here's some potential like coping skills that might help you in this real world scenarios that you're going in. And then there's also individuals that no matter, they're stubborn like myself, and they're just will not listen no matter what, and will never, I guess, seek therapy. But what are there some coping skills maybe that you use, or some tricks that we'll call it, that for somebody who's maybe not even ready to start therapy?
Yeah, absolutely. The one that I recommend the most is creating a list in your notes app on your phone of all of your favorite things. And I know that sounds really goofy.
Gratitude.
Well, yes and no. It sounds goofy because you're like, my favorite color is blue. My favorite food is this or whatever. But you actually get the dopamine kick out of it because you're listening, because it's reminding you of all of why you love that thing. Oh, yeah. I remember a time when I went with my dad and we went to hibachi and and it starts to pump those feel good hormones into your brain while you're making the list. And then while you're reading back over the list.
Gotcha.
Because again, all of that comes up. And it doesn't even have to be just like favorite color, favorite food, things like that. It's like, I love it when my windows are open and people are mowing their grass outside because it smells like fresh cut grass and it's blowing in through my house. I love that. Or, and
you don't have to do the work of mowing the grass.
Exactly. That's my husband. He does that. But, or I have a favorite blanket and I just kind of quickly describe my favorite blanket on my notes app. And my pages, it just goes like this, and it's so long at this point that I've even got my kids into doing it.
But it's therapeutic, yeah.
It's so great.
Yeah.
It also serves as really good Christmas presents.
Oh, okay.
So
there you go.
You have this list of favorite things, and then you're like, oh, okay, so I can pick that off and that off for Christmas or birthday or whatever. Anyway, it gives that feel good hormone kick that is just something small, but it is very powerful. Another one, I know that some people have really adverse reactions to this, but deep breathing, another good one, and it's derived from dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT, is called TIP, and it stands for temperature difference, intense exercise, paced breathing, and progressive muscle relaxation. And all of that is an emotional regulation tool. So, for example, if you are feeling really emotionally dysregulated, or if you're like, I am so pissed, I could bust through this wall right now, go hold an ice cube.
Interesting.
Just hold a bunch of ice cubes in your hand. Or if you work in a place that has a deep freeze, like a walk-in freezer, go stand in the walk-in freezer for a little while. Or the weather that we're having right now, we're in mid-January, right? Or end of January. Go stand outside for a little while. And what it does is your central nervous system gets confused. And when there's a different temperature, because your body temperature rises when you're upset, that when you go into the extreme cold, it actually wait a second. What's happening? And it has to take in all of the environmental stimuli to figure out exactly what's going on. And it distracts you long enough to be able to change your thoughts. So a lot of the work that I do is called cognitive behavioral therapy. And really, it's kind of encompassing all of this. It's how thoughts lead to a feeling, which leads to a behavior. If you want to see real, true behavior change, you've got to change the way that you're thinking. And it sounds easy, but it's really not. And it takes a lot of time of chiseling and figuring out where those thoughts came from, why those thoughts exist in the first place. What exactly are the thoughts? Because some people just say, well, I think I'm mad. No, you feel mad. But what's the thought leading to being mad? Well, I think someone is, pulled out in front of me in the car. Okay. So you think that happened, which led you to be mad, which now leads you to behave in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of going through that chain of command over and over and over again. So that's kind of what I explore in therapy with people. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, exactly. If you look at that like a wheel, and I know you've got a image here that we're going to add on here, but if you're looking at that like a wheel, right, it's going to keep rolling over and over in the same way. Like you have to change one of those, usually the root, if you will. You have to change the root, and as you change the root, everything else as a result will change.
Will follow. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's awesome. So again, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate you coming on, explaining everything, educating our viewers, and more importantly, to help people to maybe understand what they are feeling, why they're feeling it, and explaining what therapy is and isn't. Highly recommend therapy. I highly recommend speaking with a therapist. If you have anything going on, if you've been through childhood trauma, whatever it is, talk with somebody. And that doesn't mean an unprofessional we'll call it friend or something like
Sure.
that, or you just call somebody and regurgitate on them for an hour a day every day, because that relationship could,
Suffer.
there's when you're working with a professional, you are able to kind of spill that baggage out onto them. Is there, and this is going to be the last question, and this is, I guess, a little bit maybe for you. I don't know if I've prepared you for this, but how do you, because you deal with so much, right? How do you shake that off at the end of the day? I know, I feel like you are always such a happy and kind person. How do you shake off some of the things, like you mentioned that you work with people who've had past domestic or sexual abuse and things like that? Like, how do you not carry that around? Or if that makes sense. I know that's a deep question. I know that's a deep question to throw on you.
But I get it a lot.
Yeah.
I really do. Actually, I think all of my clients, at least at one point in time, have asked me that exact question. Yep. And I point back to teaching. You have to compartmentalize when you teach. From going from class to class, each classroom is different. Each, the vibe is different in each room. Sometimes one class will end in a full-on fight, but then the next class comes in having no idea what just happened. You kind of have to, okay, that was last class. This is this class. And they're completely different kids. They're completely different. It's a different time. I got to start fresh, right? And so I think I've carried that skill from teaching into therapy. Because I look at each individual person as, okay, they have no idea what happened last session. They weren't here. It's not their session. This is their session. And so I'm able to kind of turn that off and turn it back on again, if you will.
Gotcha.
But as far as going home goes, I know that I have absolutely done everything in my power to help that person as much as they needed in that at that time and what they needed.
With what you could give them.
With what I could give them.
Yeah. Because, and like you said, some things just take time. There's going to be individuals who've got a lot of baggage to, we'll call, dig through and understand why you feel a certain way. That's been one of the biggest changes for me last year and going into this year, is like what that resurfaced, what that caused to resurface was all the trauma and all the negative things in my life. And it brought that up to the surface, and I dealt with them all. I dealt with 30 something years of issues in a couple of months. And it was rough, would be an understatement, I feel like. And so there are some individuals who are going to need to, like I said, talk with you for a while. But thank you for coming and giving us. I know it hasn't been, this is not going to be the fix all for everyone. No. But I highly do recommend checking out the podcast. Meg's going to leave some resources at the bottom of the YouTube page here. And again, thank you so much for coming on, guys. Thank you again for tuning into today's episode. I hope you guys have an incredible day, a wonderful week, and most importantly, I hope you have a wonderful life. Thanks again. Until next time, I'll see you guys.